Welcome to the first episode of Freaky Friday. Today is October 1st, 2021. Alright guys, before we jump into today's video, as usual, my disclaimer, please remember that this video is intended to raise awareness and this channel is intended for viewers 18 years old and older. So let's just start from the very beginning. On Sunday, October 31st, 2010, 16-year-old Devin Griffin gets home from spending the weekend with his father. See, his mother and father were split up, but for the most part, Devin Griffin lived with his biological mother. Devin, that morning, he was on his way to the morning Sunday service and he sings in the choir. So he wanted to go home, change his shirt really quick. And he really only had less than 5 minutes to get in and get out of the house. Into his room, he changes his shirt. And before he leaves the house, he runs into his older stepbrother. His name is William LISKE Jr., but because, for clarity purposes for this video, we're going to call William LISKE Jr. BJ. BJ asked Devin, hey, where are you going? What are you doing? What are you up to? How long are you going to be? When are you coming back? Now, normally, Devin said that BJ's demeanor was very, dark, slowish, just very monotone, unexcited. But for some reason, Devin said on this particular morning, BJ seemed very unlike himself. He seemed happy, upbeat. Devin really didn't think much of it. So after talking to his brother BJ, he leaves the house and he goes to Sunday service. Now after singing in the church choir, church lasts about an hour, hour and a half, sometimes maximum 2. Devin gets home about 11:30, 12 o'clock. And he wanted to unwind. He had a long weekend with his father, and he was singing in the church choir. So he wanted to unwind. So he goes upstairs into his bedroom and he starts to play video games. Now, after about a couple hours, so about 1:30, 2 o'clock, around that time, Devin gets hungry and he's also wondering why the house is so quiet. Everybody's car was home, parked out front, but he hadn't seen anybody since he had gotten home. And then come to think of it, he hadn't seen anybody earlier when he had come home really quick to change his shirt. He only ran into his brother BJ. So anyways, Devin, being curious, that he goes downstairs, looking for his mom, looking for his dad. And in the household at the time, there lived Devin, his older brother Derek, his biological mother, Susan LISKE, and his stepfather, William LISKE Sr., who we're going to call William. So he goes downstairs into the master bedroom, to his parents' bedroom. He goes in, and when he goes into the bedroom, he sees his mother and his stepfather laying in bed with the maroon comforter kind of pulled up over them. He thought, okay, this was kind of odd because by the afternoon, his mother would be up and kind of, moving around the house. So he thought this was kind of strange. Nonetheless, he goes into the bedroom and he starts, talking to his mom, trying to get her to wake up, get her attention. But his mom doesn't respond or move, nor does his stepfather. So he kind of goes around the bed and he sees his mom's leg, kind of hanging out at the bottom of the bed. So, he taps it. He's still talking, trying to wake her up. And when he pulls the maroon comforter off from his parents, he sees that the pillow is just soaked in this red kind of liquid, and he thinks, and at first he thought, oh, okay, it's Halloween, good prank, guys, you guys got me, this is fake blood. But he soon realizes that this isn't a joke. His mom isn't moving or talking. His stepfather isn't moving or talking. So he is freaked out. He's terrified. He runs out of the house frantic. And instead of calling 911, I guess he is very close to one of his aunts. He calls Aunt Lori Morse. And he tells Aunt Lori everything that has happened, from the time he went home that morning until finding his parents. So immediately, Aunt Lori rushes over to the house and Devin tells her everything. And Aunt Lori calls the police. Now, when police and investigators reach the LISKE home that sits on this 100-acre property, immediately BJ LISKE is thought of as a suspect. And we'll get to the reasons why in a minute. Police and investigators get to the LISKE home and they find that Bill and Susan have been shot dead in their bed at close range. Now, Bill or William. Let's just say Bill Liske or William Liske. I might go back and forth throughout this video, but William and Bill is the same person. It's the father, it's the husband, it's the stepdad. Police find that Bill was shot about 5 times in his head and his face. Bill was found in a natural sleeping position in bed with, the covers pulled up over him. Susan Liske was shot about 3 times, again at a very close range, and investigators would later learn that Susan was actually SA before she was killed. Now, Susan was positioned a little bit awkwardly. She wasn't in a natural lying position like her husband, and police and investigators believe that Susan was probably awoken by the shots that was fired to her husband Bill. So she was awakened when Bill was being shot at, and she tried to escape. And police and investigators believe that the suspect had grabbed her, SA'd her, and then shot her, and then had moved her onto the bed, and that's why she is kind of positioned awkwardly. Police and investigators believe that the bullets came from a small .22 caliber gun. Now, one family member is still unaccounted for, so the police go upstairs to look for Devin's older brother, Derek. When they get to Derek's bedroom door, the bedroom door is locked, so police have to physically knock down and break down the bedroom door. Now, when police open the door, they find a very disturbing scene. Derek, unlike his parents, was beaten to death with like a claw, like some type of hammer. Autopsy report would show later that Derek died from blunt force trauma to his head, and that he probably died shortly after the first blow was delivered. Police do find a bloody claw hammer that is consistent to the wounds on Derek's body. At the time of their deaths, Bill was 53 years old, Susan is 46 years old, and Derek is 23 years old. Let's talk about why police and investigators immediately assumed that he could be responsible for these murders. Bill Liske and Susan got married in 2001, and immediately BJ was not happy about this couple getting together. He didn't like the fact that his father was getting remarried, for one, and he didn't like the rules that Susan imposed in her household. So from the very beginning, BJ and Susan had a very strained relationship. Now, in 2002, a year after Bill and Susan got married, Bill calls the police on his son BJ because at the time, BJ was threatening to harm himself. BJ was on house arrest at this time, and when officers arrived to the Liske home, BJ attacks the officers. In October of 2004, BJ attacks Susan and hits her really hard on her chest. 2 months later, in December, police charged BJ with assault and robbery for hitting Susan with a coffee cup and for stealing her car keys. BJ was found competent to stand trial for this case, but eventually the charges were dropped. BJ was a very violent person. He would get into fights with members of his family. He would get into trouble at school. In February of 2006, Bill files for legal guardianship over his son. In March of 2006, just a month after he files for guardianship, Bill is awarded legal guardianship over BJ due to his mental illness. In 2007, BJ is hospitalized and he is diagnosed as schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder. BJ, when he was on his medication, he would be doing very well. His outbursts and his impulse would be controlled. He wouldn't be getting into fights. He wouldn't be answering back. He would be doing very well. But what would happen is that once he would be doing well, BJ thought that he didn't need the medication anymore. And I know a lot of people do this. He thought he didn't need the medication anymore, that he was healed and he was okay. So he would stop taking his prescribed medicine, and then he would start smoking weed, he would start drinking, and then, the episodes would start all over again. One of the Liske's good family friend, his name is Mark Gradell. Bill would often call Mark to help him out with BJ. So like if BJ was being explosive, Bill would call Mark and say, hey, BJ's in doing his thing again. And Mark would come over to the house and try to, assess the situation and try and calm BJ down. He would try and do anything and everything he could so that the family would remain safe. Mark would later say that he and Bill would have serious conversations about the safety of the LISKE family. And Mark said that Bill would always say, oh, you know, BJ would never hurt us, you know, we're fine. He would never do anything to, you know, harm us, you know, so bad to that point that we wouldn't be able to recover. Some of the neighbors suspected that BJ was responsible for torturing their pets. Mark said that his dog was shot twice with a .22 caliber gun. A week before the murders occurred, Bill had taken vacation and he and BJ went deer hunting and stayed up at the family cabin in Carroll County. So now they stayed at the cabin for about a week and they got home back to Ottawa County, I think on that Saturday night, so October 30th, 2010. Bill had invited some friends over to their home. And, you know, they were talking about the hunting trip. They were talking about what they caught, what they didn't catch, you know. And Bill said that they had a great time. He and BJ bonded and, you know, they were having their father and son, you know, vacation. And Bill and BJ were in really good spirits. Now, at this point, BJ was no longer living in the LISKE home. Because he could not get along with Susan, Bill had thought it was better if BJ stayed at a group home. So at this point, BJ was a resident at a Sandusky group home. But that Saturday night, Bill was drinking and he didn't want to drive drunk and, you know, it was late at night. He thought, you know, that he would have BJ spend the night, Saturday night, and he would drive BJ home in the morning, you know, Sunday morning. No big deal. So they made a bed for BJ out in the living room on the sofa. No big deal. On Sunday morning, October 31st, 2010, around 6:30 a.m., Mark's wife, Michelle Grado, said she heard gunshots, but didn't really think, you know, too much of it. I mean, they did live on a 100-acre property and were hunters. Later on that Sunday, police and investigators find BJ hiding out at the family cabin in Carroll County, at that cabin where he and his father were just at. Apparently, BJ had taken the family's Ford F-150 right after he had spoken to his younger brother, Devin Griffin, that morning. BJ left the LISKE home, stopped in at Subway to get a sandwich, and then drove up to the cabin. Police apprehend BJ without incident. He's arrested and charged with aggravated murder, and he's held at a $3 million bond. If BJ is found guilty of murder, he could face the death penalty. At BJ's first arraignment, he pleads not guilty to the aggravated murder charge. But later, BJ would change that plea to guilty on all 3 charges of aggravated murder so that the death penalty could be taken off the table. During BJ's trial, he did speak, and he spoke with really no emotion. BJ said, and I quote, "I loved my dad very much, and it makes me feel sick every time I think about what I did. I can't explain why this all had to happen, but I think most of all, it had to do with my mental illness," end quote. BJ did apologize, but again, his apology was very emotionless. He blamed his actions on his mental illness and the devil. Look at that. Look at that. Do you guys see that little right here? Where is it? Right there. The little Geico gecko looking at me. So BJ was found guilty, and he was to serve 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now on March 31st, 2015, the 29-year-old is serving his life imprisonment at the Ross Correctional Institution. Around 11:25 p.m. that night, he is found dead in his prison cell due to a self-inflicted wound. I couldn't find what that self-inflicted wound was. Usually if someone hangs themselves in their prison cell, it would say so, but it just said self-inflicted wound. I'm thinking maybe he had, and this is just my assumption, maybe he had like a shank, you know, and then stabbed himself. I don't know, but they didn't really go into detail. But his manner of death is deemed as suicide. All right, guys, that's all I have for you on this case. Have you guys even heard about this case? Let me know your thoughts, your opinions, your theories. I really want to know. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys next week.